Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is the story of Miles Morales, the teenage kid who's growing up in Brooklyn, New York. Miles gets bitten by a radioactive spider one day and then starts developing these really strange abilities. He's in the midst of navigating these new abilities when a new threat called the Collider gets introduced and is capable of wiping out all of existence. Miles luckily stumbles across Peter B. Parker, who is Spider-Man from another dimension, who can help him accomplish both of his goals, learning his powers and saving the universe. And the two have to work together in order to accomplish both of them. And we have our movie. I have to say, I deeply enjoyed this well-rounded take on Spider-Man. It was really cool seeing a new character come into his own as Spider-Man rather than just Peter Parker like we've seen since the dawn of live-action Spider-Man movies. We get an origin story that's different of Peter Parker's and adds a really cool twist and spin on everything we know as Spider-Man. And it brings in a lot of different twists to the superhero character that are welcome additions, whether it be abilities, the music, the relationships between characters. All of it was really enriching. And along the way of Miles coming to his own, the movie doesn't take itself too seriously, enables you to have a really fun time with it. And it's successful at being funny, albeit being very meaningful and full of substance. And it made for a great experience. Let's start off with what I really enjoyed about this movie, because there's a lot. Miles Morales as a character is a breath of fresh air. Peter Parker has been in Spider-Man films since the dawn of live-action Spider-Man films, dating all the way back to Tobey Maguire back in the early 2000s. But in this case, with Miles Morales, we get a very much different look and feel to our Spider-Man. He's a middle schooler. He's a little bit younger. He's got middle school tendencies. He's got middle schooler problems. He's an artist. He's got different tastes, and his suit is a really nice welcome change because it is absolutely sweet. And with Miles, we get a bit of a different persona, a different flavor, but in this case, he's more hellbent on keeping the promises that he makes. And he has the absolute best intentions on helping people. Not to say that Peter Parker doesn't, but with Miles, we just get a different flavor to that. And that makes him a worthy superhero and really easy to empathize with, which really helps you root for him the entire movie. And the best part about this is him being a younger teenager, he's not afraid to ask for guidance and advice because it shows the human side of him. He needs that as a young kid. He might need help from his parents, he might need help from his fellow Spider-Man, or other loved ones for that matter. And that just really shows that not every superhero is just great out of nowhere. They need guidance along the way in order to become and shape who they are. Also, Jake Johnson is excellent. Peter B. Parker is voiced by Jake Johnson. He's the Spider-Man who helps Miles and is the Spider-Man from another dimension. But he ends up slowly having to mentor Miles through his new state of being, and Jake Johnson really sells that mentorship role really well. The voice performance that Jake Johnson has to give in order to help show that slow character growth from not being a great mentor to changing it up. The voice performance he gives has to help show character growth because Peter B. Parker undergoes a lot of change in this runtime. And Jake Johnson executes that really, really well. From having a range of tones that go from uncaring, relaxed, and sometimes selfish, to full of sincerity, patience, and care. Also, the soundtrack to this movie is absolutely fire. The soundtrack is so good that I actually ended up knowing most of it going into the movie because I had heard it on a lot of TikTok videos I made. I would use the Spider-Verse soundtrack a lot of times in my videos, and it just had really awesome beats. It was just different, and I really enjoyed it. It felt a lot more culturally relevant than most soundtracks that I've heard in movies. And what's great is this movie places the songs in such a way to where they always make sense for the situation. It's really hard for a movie's soundtrack to really nail down the look, feel, and tone of whatever's happening on screen, but this movie does that successfully. And it never really felt out of place. I was very impressed. Biggie Smalls and Post Malone are two artists that are part of this soundtrack that at minimum most people have heard of. Also, there's some great relationships between characters in this movie. Into the Spider-Verse really fits in a lot of different relationships between parent to son, mentor to student, friend to friend, and the movie fits each of these interesting, complex relationships into their own subplot point without making the movie feel too bloated and too much to digest. They all work together and intricately fit into the film. You get to see father and son work through many obstacles that many families face, such as tough love, challenging expectations, and setting goals. Other times you see mentor and student go through trials and tribulations that seem familiar and are captured in really realistic ways. And lastly, you see friendships form between characters that go through their own challenges, like with vulnerability, openness, and trust. All of these relationships bring something to the movie that feels authentic and in turn help you feel connected to it. Also, the movie's humor is very self-aware. There are many laughs to be had with Into the Spider-Verse, which is great because it keeps the movie from taking itself too seriously and keeps you having a fun time throughout the entirety of it. None of the characters are afraid to crack a joke in dire situations, and it lands really well. It doesn't feel like it's trying too hard, which is a tough balance because this can be really dangerous in movies that have very serious tones in nature, but it works very well with Into the Spider-Verse. And lastly, there's some really effective writing for the main antagonist. The main antagonist for this movie ultimately has motivations that we've seen before. However, the movie actually excels at making this antagonist a little bit more solid because they effectively demonstrate the reason why he has his motivations. You won't be in support of what they want by the time the movie ends, but at least you'll understand it. And that elevates the movie because you have levity with both sides of the equation, the antagonist and the protagonist. But what Into the Spider-Verse does so brilliantly within that is that it gives the main antagonist very little dialogue throughout the movie. It never has the antagonist, from what I can remember, say out loud what exactly his motivations are. The movie shows you what they want rather than telling you, and it lets you kind of figure it out and piece it together on your own, which makes it a lot more meaningful because it prompts you to extract what's going on rather than just force feeding it to you, and that's great. Now, how about what I didn't like so much about this movie? The movie's build-up, I think, is way too long. It takes a little less than half of the movie to finally get to the point where our protagonists are doing something about the obstacle that they're trying to overcome. Everything up until that point is building Miles's world, introducing us to all the characters. And although it's important to establish a good world with a good base for us to latch onto, I think they could have spent more time trying to overcome their obstacles, like introducing Miles to his powers and teaching him how to control them. The movie goes through that too quickly to the point where it feels like it was just glossed over, and I think there could have been some very interesting moments in that. Also, the way they used Miles' Uncle Aaron in the movie I thought was pointless. I have to be a little bit vague with this to avoid spoilers, but Uncle Aaron is Miles' uncle, and he spends a lot of time with Miles and serves as a role model. And they do things together frequently within this world. They talk things out, he offers guidance, and they attempt to do something with Uncle Aaron that's really ambitious, but it ultimately ends up falling flat and feeling really out of place. Rather than trying to put so much ambition in Uncle Aaron, I would have liked to have seen more of the relationship dynamic between Miles' dad and Miles' Uncle Aaron to see how that hashes out. I think it could have really lined up with the DNA of the movie where it introduces a lot of these character relationships that I mentioned earlier, and I think it would just fit a lot more. So with that, friends, I'm gonna have to give this movie an 8 out of 10. It was great, and I highly recommend watching it, especially if you're looking for something different within the Spider-Man character. Friends, have you seen Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse? If so, what'd you think of it? You know where the comment section is. Let me know. Thanks so much for watching another Bankrupt Hippo movie review. If you like this, click right here if you'd like to see more. I've been Bryce, and until next time, have a great day.